Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
The restaurant was known for breakfast, lunch, and hugs. Tim didn't have like a lot of non-negotiables in how the restaurant was to be set up, but he insisted that somehow Tim Hugs needed to appear on his menu.
No extra cost for a Tim Hug?
Free. Tim insisted on those letters right next to that item on the menu.
That's our guest this week, Keith Harris, an entrepreneur and father of 4, including his son Tim, age 38, who has Down syndrome. Keith and Tim opened and ran a restaurant. Tim has written a children's book available on Amazon, and they've formed Tim's Big Heart Foundation, changing the world one hug at a time. This is the second of the 2-part interview where Keith Harris tells us about the importance of hugs to his son Tim, their restaurant promising hugs to all, and a meeting with President Obama in which Tim, you guessed it, gave a big old hug to the Commander-in-Chief. It's the conclusion of this fascinating story on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Now say hello to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and host of the Dad to Dad podcast, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network, a Dad to Dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. The Special Fathers Network Mastermind Group experience is the most comprehensive program the 21st Century Dads Foundation offers. Dads raising children with special needs meet virtually on a weekly basis and form meaningful relationships while sharing weekly wins, discussing books, and sharing heartfelt challenges. One of the highlights of the year is attending an in-person weekend retreat. We're launching 10 new mastermind groups in 2024 with 10 dads per group. That means we're only looking for 10 like-minded dads in each community. If you're a dad raising a child with special needs, we hope you'll join a local mastermind group and make the investment to become the best version of yourself. For more information, please see the show notes or simply go to 21stcenturydads.org.
Now let's hear this final installment of this conversation between Keith Harris and David Hirsch.
I'm thinking about supporting organizations, and I'm wondering what organizations come to mind that Tim's benefited from directly, or maybe your family has benefited from as a result of Down syndrome.
You know, Tim discovered Special Olympics when he was about 13 and has been very involved with Special Olympics locally, nationally, and internationally. It's been a real neat forum for him to really kind of come into his own, to have friends that he competes with, to have the pageantry of their big opening ceremonies and the exhilaration of winning a race or winning a basketball game or a volleyball game. They've been absolutely incredible for his development. We've also worked a lot with our local Down syndrome organization. They're called the Rio Grande Down Syndrome Network. They have regular community events and picnics and fundraising walks, things like that. We've also been involved since Tim was a baby with a national organization called the National Down Syndrome Congress. Mm-hmm. They're headquartered in Atlanta, and they're most well known for their annual convention. They organize the largest convention of its type in the world every summer. It draws anywhere from 2,000 to about 5,000 participants from around the world. And they're mostly families that have a family member with Down syndrome, but also quite a few academics and medical professionals come to the conference. It's been an amazing networking opportunity for us as a family.
It sounds like it. Thank you for sharing. And just to be clear, you mentioned about Special Olympics locally, nationally, internationally. You mentioned basketball and volleyball. Were those his 2 main sports, or did he play other sports as well?
He's got a lot of sports, David. That's like, I know if he listens to this, he'll correct me because I'll leave something out. But in the winter, like right now, the season is a sport called poly hockey, which is like ice hockey, but on a gymnasium floor without ice. And then late spring and summer are the summer games, and he competes in track and field. He does the pentathlon and quite a few sprinting events. also plays volleyball during the summer games. And then in the fall, his favorite sport is basketball. And a few seasons, he's done golf and softball. I think I'm getting close to the complete list, but he'll definitely correct me when he hears this.
Were you here in Chicago for the 50-year anniversary gathering?
No.
Okay.
We were not. But it started right there where you are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, right? Just to be surrounded with people from, I think it was 120 different countries. It was wild. It was wild.
Yeah. We were part of the 50th anniversary celebration. We were guests at the White House during the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. President and Mrs. Obama were the honorary chairs of the World Games in Los Angeles that were in commemoration of the 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
They hosted an event at the White House in 2014 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Special Olympics. We got to be Tim's guests for an evening at the White House, and Tim got to give a very unscripted, spontaneous hug to the President of the United States that night.
Tim Harris is a Special Olympian in basketball, poly hockey, volleyball, golf, and track and field, so he has all 4 seasons covered. Now he has a restaurant in Albuquerque called Tim's Place. The most popular item is the hug Tim's gives his customers. And so far, more than 42,000 have been served. So where's Tim? There he is right there. Hey, Tim. Tim. Tim's fired up. Tim is fired up. Although, Tim, I didn't get a hug. Come on, man. Oh, here we go. All right. Come on. Come on, man. Come on, bud.
I love you, Obama.
I love you back. Oh, yeah. See, you know, presidents need some encouragement once in a while, too. That felt really good. That was nice. Thank you, Tim.
And then a year later, in 2015, during the summer games, Tim was asked to introduce First Lady Michelle Obama at the opening ceremonies for the World Games in front of 65,000 people at the LA Coliseum and a worldwide television audience on ESPN.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It's obvious that Special Olympics has played a really important role in Tim's life and your family's life, for that matter.
Most definitely.
Yeah. It's not lost on me, when we were first starting the Special Fathers Network, we were warmly embraced by Dave Breen, who's the longtime executive director, president of Special Olympics Illinois.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Dave Breen and a couple of others, I don't know that we would actually be having this conversation today. So I have a special place in my heart for different reasons.
Wow.
For Special Olympics as well. So let's talk about special needs beyond your own family situation. You've shared with me in a prior conversation a number of different experiences, and one that stuck in mind was this restaurant that you started named Tim's Place.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what's the backstory, and what can you share with our listeners today?
When Tim was about 13 or 14 years old, so right at the transition between middle school and high school, he started telling his friends that someday he wanted to own a restaurant. It was kind of a curiosity to me that he would say that. And I think he was a kid who really always loved the idea when we went out to a restaurant. He loved the whole experience, the whole vibe. And he is such a connector that he would, even as a little boy in a restaurant, he would excuse himself to go use the restroom, right? And then he wouldn't come back. And we would go, either me or one of his brothers or Jeannie would go looking for him. And he'd be sitting there talking to some tables, right? Introducing himself to people that were dining in the restaurant and having a great conversation. And it's kind of part of who he is. During high school, he wound up getting a job here in Albuquerque at a chain restaurant called Red Robin. It's a burger place. I don't know if you have those in Illinois. But he was a host there. And the general manager called me to a meeting after Tim had been there for a couple of months. I kind of thought as a dad that Tim might have been in trouble, right? But he had all of his financial reports, his daily reports sitting in front of him, and he said, Mr. Harris, our sales are up about 20% on the shifts that Tim works. Can you explain that to me? I'm like, not exactly, because I'm not there, but I did know that a lot of Tim's friends from high school started coming to that restaurant, like faithfully. And a lot of our friends came. And then more importantly, a lot of people from the community that didn't know Tim, that had kids with special needs, started frequenting that restaurant. I was really proud of the effect he was having on that store. And the entrepreneur in me the light bulb kicked in and said, wow, if he's, able to make money through his influence for a corporation, could that be harnessed for himself, right? And so we started to get serious about thinking about a restaurant for him. And in 2010, that came to fruition. We opened a restaurant called Tim's Place here in Albuquerque, and it was open for breakfast and lunch. We were open from 7 a.m. till 2:30 p.m. with the idea that Tim could still have a life in the evening. The restaurant was known for breakfast, lunch, and hugs. Tim didn't have like a lot of non-negotiables in how the restaurant was to be set up, but he insisted that somehow Tim hugs needed to appear on his menu. So that's exactly what happened in the restaurant. When you opened up the menu, the first thing that you noticed was an item called a Tim hug. We explained to Tim that a lot of people, for whatever reasons, their own trauma, a lot of people don't like to be touched by other people. And that's certainly their right. So we set it up in the restaurant that Tim only hugged customers when they requested a hug. So it was on the menu as something that you would order. And it said, talk to a host or hostess or to your server if you want to order a Tim hug. So that was part of the business model, was a lot of hugs.
No extra cost for a Tim hug?
FREE. Tim insisted on those letters right next to that item on the menu. He kept track of those, David, every day with a little golf score counter in his pocket. So he'd deliver a hug, reach in his pocket, you'd hear a little click. And at the end of every shift, the managers would look at his counter, and they had like a little remote control. We had an electronic hug counter on the wall. So daily that number got updated. When the restaurant closed in 2015, Tim was somewhere in excess of 75,000 official hugs. There were lots and lots more than that didn't get counted, but 75,000 official hugs that were delivered in that place.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of like the McDonald's, would be the burger served up on the sign in front of all the restaurants.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have Jimmy John's there in Albuquerque.
We do.
And they sort of irreverently, talk about free smells, right? You can get free smells if you're at Jimmy John's.
Free smells, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It was very, very much like that, very much like that.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks for sharing. What a great experience all around. And the second thing that came to mind, and it had to do with Tim's passion for hugs, I guess, is the children's book.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can share with our listeners the backstory on that, the title, and what the premise for that book is.
Yeah. So the backstory is that my wife and I have some friends in Canada. Our friend Anne is a co-owner of a company called Flower Pot Press. She and her brother own and run the company. And I think last time I looked, they were the second largest publisher of children's books in North America. And when Anne really kind of got to know Tim some years back, it really clicked in her mind that someday she wanted her company to take on the idea of working with Tim to create a through a series of steps, we came to the conclusion that they were ready to move forward with that idea. And so her brother, Pat, who is the CEO of the company, came to spend a few days with us, spent a bunch of one-on-one time with Tim, and audio recorded the entire time he was with Tim. From their conversations, he pulled down a concept and all of the text for a book, and it's called The Book of Hugs. It was sort of collaboratively written by Pat Hayes, the CEO, and Tim together. Pat says that every word in the book are Tim's words, not his words, but he kind of helped Tim weave that into a really compelling story for kids. And so it's the story of a character called Teddy Bear Tim. And if Tim is sitting with you, David, he will point to that character and whisper to you, "That's really me." As if you couldn't make that connection. Throughout the book, the teddy bear is teaching his friends, who are young monkeys, about the art and science of hugging, the different types of hugs, when they're appropriate, when they're not, and the idea that consent and permission needs to be part of the whole equation. The book is done phenomenally well commercially. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, lots and lots of local bookstores. So Tim has the enviable title of a published author to add to his considerable resume.
Would you refer to that as a best-selling published author or not?
That's kind of a subjective term, but yes, there were quite a few months where it was in the top 4 or 5 children's books sold by Amazon. I can also kind of measure that by the royalty checks Tim's been getting, so they've been coming in quite regularly. So
that's fabulous. Well, thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
And then the third thing that I recall from a prior conversation is that you've created a family foundation, and it's got 2 different focuses, the Tim's Big Heart Foundation, and then the work that you do separately, healing of trauma for those who are serving.
Correct.
Military, first responders. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to each of those briefly.
Absolutely. Our new 501c3 is called the Harris Family Foundation, and it's newly incorporated here in New Mexico, just getting up and running in a big way this year. Like you mentioned, we have 2 sort of like program areas or focus areas. The first is separately branded as Tim's Big Heart Foundation. And in that particular enterprise, we are working in a couple of Caribbean countries, island nations, as well as here in New Mexico. I guess the best way to describe it is we're endeavoring through a variety of methods to help families expand their vision for what might be possible for their young child with a disability. When I look back over my life experience from the time Tim was very young, I met people who were further along the path than me that really opened my eyes to possibility. And it was sorely needed for me when Tim was very young. It's really easy, like you say, to pay attention to Google and things like that can paint a pretty pessimistic vision of the future. And so we're working pretty diligently in those places to help families that have young kids kind of like catch a glimpse of a different future. And couldn't be more excited about that.
What are the 2 countries that you made reference to earlier?
Jamaica and Grenada are the 2 countries that we're working in the Caribbean. And recently, about 6 months ago, we've circled back to add our home state of New Mexico. And New Mexico, for those that don't know that, is the state that ranks 49th or 50th on most of the lists. And so when Tim heard me speak about we're working in places with less resources, he's asking me, "Dad, isn't New Mexico one of those places?" I'm like, "Yes, you are not wrong, sir." So that's our current service area. We hope to eventually, as time permits, to expand into more and more Caribbean countries, as well as ultimately into Central and South America. These are places we've spent a lot of time and have a lot of connections.
Is it because of your sailing that you made connections in Jamaica and Grenada then, or not?
Yeah, definitely. Within that decision-making matrix, my wife Jeannie and I, after we sold our company, our technology company, in 2017, set out to live aboard our sailboat. We'd been sailing for about close to 20 years prior to that, part-time, including sometimes many months of the year. Once we were finally free from the shackles of business ownership, we bought a one-way ticket to Florida and boarded our boat, went to Costco, bought a bunch of groceries, checked out of the marina, and set off for the Caribbean, and spent about 4 to 5 years making the boat our home, and visited 23 countries, slowly making our way through the Caribbean basin.
That's amazing. That's like one of those bucket list type of experiences, right? That most people only think about or dream about. And what an amazing experience for you to actually do that.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience for us. Like, we still talk about it most every day. But about 3 years ago, we became grandparents. Jeannie and I knew that there was a specific window of time between when we would sell our company and when we would have grandkids. We decided together that we would make the most out of our sailing life during those years, and we did. But once we found out that our youngest son was expecting what is now our oldest granddaughter, we decided it was time to hang up the Jimmy Buffett lifestyle. So we sold our boat and moved back to land right here in Albuquerque.
Yeah, well, there might be some sailing in your future, even if it's not at that same level, right? That's pretty extreme, right? To be able to pack it all in and just sail for months and months at a time, years.
Yeah, we definitely have aspirations to do a lot more sailing, but just in sort of a different way.
Maybe when the grandkids get to be a little older.
Yeah, absolutely. You got it.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
The second part of the foundation, other than Tim's Big Heart Foundation being focused on serving families in a couple Caribbean nations as well as New Mexico, has to do with serving those who chose careers that experienced some trauma.
Yeah.
Mostly first responders, military. And what's the backstory there?
I guess I can map all this really back to my kids, right? My youngest son, David, his name is John, is a firefighter here in Albuquerque. He's a lieutenant. Just walking through these last dozen years or so with John, I have gotten to see, not firsthand, but secondhand, what the reality is for people in that profession. They wind up, at the scene of every horrific car accident, every shooting, stabbing, mugging. When they're on shift, they wind up seeing and experiencing a lot of things that the rest of us don't have to see because they're willing to do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm really moved by how much trauma my son carries and people like him carry. And so we've decided to dedicate part of our mission with our family foundation to providing certain trauma healing services to those who have selflessly picked a career to be in service to their fellow man, and in doing so have picked up some trauma along the way. So we're focused on specifically on returning combat veterans, first responders in the form of police officers and firefighters and EMS personnel, as well as individuals who work on the front lines of healthcare. That a lot of those folks were pretty badly beaten up during COVID and prior to COVID. People that work in oncology wards, trauma centers, emergency rooms. It's a heavy lift for a lot of people. And there's just, in my opinion, just not enough things made available to those groups. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to have the maximum impact in that field.
Yeah, well, my hat's off to you and Jeannie for having that insight informed by your son John's experience as a first responder, as a firefighter. And there's no question in my mind that while people associate PTSD with combat veterans, and all that they see and do, similar experiences, which are hard to measure because they're not visible. Right. There are things that impact us mentally and emotionally.
Yep.
These wounds or these scars remain invisible to the general public.
Yep.
But haunt people, right, in different ways.
Yeah.
And, higher incidences of suicide and traumatizes people, and it comes out in different ways.
Yeah.
They're not able to maintain relationships like they would have been otherwise, marriages, or be the parents, moms and dads that they would have been otherwise because of the trauma that they've shouldered. And great that you're helping fill that void or bridge that gap, meet that unmet need that I think that exists in society.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's it just feels like such a great alignment for me of my life's experience, as an entrepreneur and as a dad, and then just these two threads of our foundation, right? Each one is directly linked to one of my sons.
Yeah.
But it's a greater need. It's not about my sons, right? It's about who they represent.
Yeah. Well, your son's experiences have informed you and Jeannie, right, about different aspects or elements of society.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning. This is a new foundation.
Yeah.
Who's to say there won't be a third or a fourth or a fifth thread, for that matter, that you weave into that?
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking about spirituality, and I'm curious to know what, if any, role that's played in your lives.
I have a long and varied history in terms of traditional religion. I guess if I fast forward to age 67, I am 100% certain that I am part of something, we all are, that's much larger than we are. And I consider myself to be a profoundly spiritual man, and seek guidance each and every day from a source that's bigger than me. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And I measure that, David, in so many ways by how I feel when I am setting out to do the work I'm setting out to do. It's almost like being on some sort of a beam. And inside my heart, I can feel when I'm lined up on that beam. And that's my guide stone, I would say, these days.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And I love that visual image of being on a beam and being in alignment, sort of balancing, if you will, right, between different elements, right, in our lives. And, a lot of people don't get much past the work-family balance, right, in their lives.
Right.
And maybe now that you've sort of hung up your work spurs, you're, looking to match your resources and your values, right? And that's what I hear you talking about.
You are exactly right with that assessment. You're exactly right.
So I'm thinking about advice, and I'm wondering, maybe beyond the scope of the conversation we've had, if there's any specific advice you'd offer parents, specifically dads, who find that they have a child with a diagnosis.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I would tell a new dad or a young dad that you and your spouse are the experts as it comes to your child. I see so many young families get so confused by what a counselor told them or a social worker told them or a therapist or a teacher. First and foremost, trust yourself, that you know what's best for your family, you know what's best for your child. Listen to other people, but they're not in charge. You are. That'd be piece of advice number one. And piece of advice number two would be, don't accept limits for your child or your family based on a diagnosis. If you tune in and listen to what I would call the system, you might get a very minimalist view of what the future might hold for you and your family and your child. Again, I urge everyone to listen to all inputs, but ultimately reach for the stars that you don't know until you try.
Two pearls of wisdom. You know your child better than anyone else possibly could. And then don't put any limits on any of your children, whether they're typical or atypical, for that matter.
That's right.
Only God knows what is possible.
Right.
And, who are we to judge what somebody is capable of doing or not capable of doing? So thank you.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's that potential is in God's hands, not in our hands. It's naive of us in many ways to think that we're the one that's going to set the cap.
Absolutely. So I'm sort of curious to know, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
It just has so much meaning when I think of myself, David, as younger Keith raising young Tim, and how many points along that path I came across a father who was older than me and had more experience than me, that put his hand out and had a kind word, a piece of advice, or just a knowing smile, right? I mean, sometimes it's all of those things. And I'm a big believer in the circle of life, right? That there's a time for me when I was young and I was drinking in advice, right? And it's now time at my age to be thinking about giving that back. So it's just as simple as that. So it's a desire to serve, as I have been served.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for being involved at the network. That image that you made reference to the drinking, the water, if you will, brings to mind a very positive influence that took place when I was in my mid-30s. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of the dipper and the bucket. Does that ring a bell with you at all?
No.
No? Don Clifton, who was the head of the Gallup Leadership Institute in Lincoln, Nebraska, was the creator of this concept. It was a pamphlet, and then it morphed into books, multiple books, The Dipper and the Bucket. And the simple concept is that we each carry around a bucket, right, if you will, on our backs.
Yep.
And people have the ability to fill our buckets, right? And when your bucket is full, it's overflowing, you're invincible, right? You can do anything.
Yep.
And then we also have the ability to drain people's buckets, right? Take dips out of people's buckets, empty their buckets. And, when you're empty, there's not a lot of hope, right? You don't have a lot of confidence.
Right.
And that's the image that came to mind when you were talking about drinking, right? You're taking in all this information, energy, positivity from others. And that at some point, you realize, hey, maybe it's time to do the same for others, right? That's what I heard you saying. So,
yeah.
So is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm very happy.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Let's give a special shout out to Randy Mescarella at Special Olympics New Mexico for helping connect us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will definitely be calling her later today.
If somebody wants to learn more about the Book of Hugs, your family foundation, or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
They can find us online at timsbigheartfoundation.org.
Okay.
That would be the very best way. Or do any kind of a Google search on Tim Harris Down syndrome, and you will definitely find us.
Okay. I'll be sure to include that in the show notes so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody to follow up with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Keith, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, Keith's just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Keith, thanks again.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.